Oh man, I had a tough time with this film. Um,
Hmm.
because it's like I think because it's about a pedophile, um, and like for me, like it just like pedophiles are the most evil people on the planet to me. Like they're almost like not human. They're not human to me. Like I just had like such a hard time with it. Just because of the child abuse aspect part of it. Um, so I don't know if this is I don't know if this was the best film for me, you know. It's like it's just yeah, like the humor that was supposed to be in the film was just not funny for me.
Yeah.
So I had a really hard time with it. Just with the film itself. Because I don't think like the craftsmanship of the film and like the acting and like the actual mechanisms of the like I thought I thought the script was very formulaic, um, very Hollywood script. I and the acting was serviceable. But yeah, just with like the subject matter and I just had a really hard time with it. But we'll talk about it, I suppose. Um, yeah. So today we're talking about May December. It is a 2023 film directed by Todd Haynes, with a screenplay by Sammy Birch. So yeah, let's talk about the opening images. Because we see a butterfly, accompanied by some really dramatic, like overly dramatic music. Um, and this is broken up very quickly. Like a minute into the film, we hear that we um we see that joke essentially where like the dramatic music stops, and then Julianne Moore opens the refrigerator and she says something like, we don't have any hot dogs, or we ran out of hot dogs, or something like that,
We're
right?
not going to have enough hot dogs. Yeah.
Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. So it's, you can immediately see that uh, the director here is playing with the tone, and there's this humor here. Opening thoughts, opening impressions, Tom. How did you feel?
Yeah. I actually thought, exactly the opening you just described was probably some of the most successful work in the film because it was so obvious and so clear. Like, that's a kind of difficult thing to do to say, there's going to be we're going to play with tone in this movie in a way that you have to be confident to do it, right? That music was so sort of cheesy and melodramatic and over the top that like you kind of have to have some grit to do that at all, right? Because it is the intro to the movie. So I think because he's Todd Haynes and he's not in fear of like people are going to think this is a cheesy movie by accident. Like he didn't have that fear. So he was able to sort of take a big risk with that. Like if you think about the sort of very tried and tired, imagery of like, butterflies coming out of their chrysalis and like this dramatic music. And then like the, opening the fridge and being like, we're not gonna have enough hot dogs. It's like dun dun. Like that's a funny moment for me because it's just like this is a really quick shorthand way to say like what we're seeing here is suburbia, and in the current version of these people's lives, that is a big dramatic moment. Is that you might have a barbecue and not have enough hot dogs. Like to me, that was like that's kind of funny. And I think there were other moments that were supposed to be similarly funny throughout the movie that were less successful for me. Um, because once you do know that there is actual underlying drama and a lot of really crazy stuff has happened, it's sort of harder to laugh at those things. So in the beginning, what do we know? We know someone is coming to their barbecue and they're a little bit nervous about her and they're hoping that she's not sort of stuck up. Like, and they're worried. It's just a family worried about barbecue. And you also don't know who's who yet, right? You don't know, like, is this person a son? Is this person a husband? You see kind of, it's also not that clear immediately in your face that their ages are so different and what their relationships are. There's someone else sitting at the barbecue who is more similar in age, maybe to Julianne Moore. So there's a lot of like things we don't know yet that allow that beginning to me to be kind of funny. Um, So, and again, it was very obvious. I don't think anybody would have been confused by that moment of like that dramatic music and that, you know, um, I don't know if that landed because you're bringing that up as like a joke, maybe that didn't land, I guess, or
I don't know the real story. Have you guys done a little bit of research on the actual the story of this?
I think it's only loosely based on a real
Okay.
story. It's sort of like inspired by a real story, but these are not the characters
Oh
of
yeah.
like that's not their names. It's not. It's just sort of like there's this thing that happened with this, 30-something-year-old teacher and her, I think her student or a student at least, and but I think it was only kind of like loosely based on that story. It's not like this is not like a story, of a movie telling of that specific story.
Okay. Um, I was like curious, how is she living in this community? Like, how is she able to like pedophiles, aren't they usually like, don't they usually have to live in separate communities? Like, how is she living among children?
No, they show that actually in the film. It's not that you have to live in a sex community, but you have, if you're a registered sex offender, it's like you go on a list and then everyone who lives in a certain, like, however much radius, it gets notified that this person lives. But it also seems like this is such a small town that everyone knows, and also they're still living, like, it's not like this is something that happened in the past. This is that, oh, that's the family where, you know, the wife is 20 something years older than the husband and they started dating when she had an affair when he was 13, right? I think that's like they go out of their way to say that like everyone in this town knows that
Yeah,
that's
no.
who they are.
Yeah, I got that. I was just, yeah, because I was thinking about
And
like documentaries that
So
about like
I
about
wonder if like
pedophiles and
so like your reaction to this, at least in some part, has to do with something that started happening in my brain too, watching this is like there is such a what do you call it? Uh a double standard for male and female pedophiles, you know what I'm saying? And it's sort of like I feel like
oh yeah,
so you're
that's such
waiting
an
maybe
interesting
for that reaction or something,
that's just an
like more
interesting
horror and like
that's such
perpetuated horror about it. I don't know. Is
no, no,
it
no. I think you're
or is it
totally
just
right. I
me?
think you're totally, totally right. I think
Because my brain accepted this story differently. It just damn well did.
but
And
well, I also think that you're right. I also think that like female pedophiles are not the same as male pedophiles. I mean that's
they're treated certainly differently, I
but
think.
I think they are I think it is a little bit different because if that was a male and like that happened to like one of my family, like I would have murdered him. Like I would have like taken
like
a gun
I
and I would have
think
like you know what I mean?
I
Like
think
there's no
we
nuance there.
also would
There's
we
like
we
yeah.
also would
I'm
like
sorry.
to
Go ahead.
believe that if this I think we also would like to believe if this happened if it were a male, like that person would be in prison forever, right? At minimum, right? And so there is no, I think it's a smart choice, and I think it's a decision on the part of the writers that like it's not that. This is not, if this story is about anything to me, it's about trying to be successful with the nuance. Because I think most people, when you hear the facts of it, you're like, well, this is a despicable person. This should have never happened. The end. And I think the whole movie is sort of trying to get to a place where anything could be more nuanced than that. Like, and I don't
Yeah.
know that it's entirely successful, but that is kind of what it's trying to do, right? Like,
Mm,
and that's kind of what Natalie Portman is trying to do, right? And it's like the lens of the film is basically Natalie Portman's lens, where it's like let's dive into see what happened and see how we feel about this character, in a way that, again, if we brand her as a pedophile, which she is, sort of objectively, is there a way for that to be more complicated than just she's a despicable person and the end? For me, that's all this movie's about, is like that sort of investigation, which is a very difficult investigation. And I don't think it's a possible investigation if she's a man. I don't think there
Mm.
is any possible way for anyone to see something as other than, this is a despicable person who deserves to die, essentially. Like, or, some people, or deserves to be at minimum in prison for the rest of his life. And so, sort of like forcing us to think about that double standard should it be a double standard? Is that a double standard that we're okay with? Is it not? Is there is if there was some abuse in her past, does that mean anything? It's still her actions, or does it make it more not justified but more understandable because she was abused? If abuse perpetuates abuse, does that make it more not okay but more understandable? Like these are things that, if the movie is successful, it forces you to think about those things. Now, if you don't want to think about those things, probably shouldn't watch this movie. Um,
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, to me, like there isn't much of an investigation. Like there's like again, she is who she is, and like I have no sort of like sympathy or yeah, I didn't yeah, in my mind, I don't really have that double standard. Like she is, yeah, she is this terrible person to me. Um,
So like a pedophile is just no redeeming qualities.
I don't to me, like I
Yeah,
it's a hard thing to talk about, because
got it.
yeah, I don't think so. And it's um like that in itself is a very sad thing, I think, because I recently watched Werner Herzog's his documentary series on Death Row Inmates. Have you watched
Mhm.
that, Susie? You should watch it. I think you'd find it
No.
interesting and powerful.
Okay.
And Herzog does a great job, but you know, he's against the death penalty, Herzog. He's
Mhm.
like vehemently against it. Like um
Yeah.
I'm not I don't think I'm one of those. I found the work really compelling and interesting. I don't think I'm one of those people. I think um I don't know. I don't know if all people have value and pedophiles, in particular. I just I don't know. It's a tough thing. So like
So
for
then you hardly
me,
have to
like
justify yourself.
yeah, I don't, yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah, the investigation part of it, I thought it was interesting when Portman's in the classroom and a kid asks a question about like her sex scenes or something, and like the last comment was something like I do these roles to find like the moral, like the gray areas, and like that I think the student mentions Tony Soprano or something. Um, I mean, there are no gray areas here to me. Not really. And there are no like it's a terrible thing that this terrible person did, and then Portman's kind of swooping in, and she's also a very selfish person, and she's also taking advantage of the situation. So it's about terrible people doing terrible things to other people, and that's what the film is about. There's no like for me like there was no heart, but there was no like there was nothing for me to like it's already stuff that I know. There's nothing for me to connect to
yeah.
here. Um, so
No,
that's the trouble. Like there's no story here. Um,
I think I I 100% get where you're coming from because I kind of have the same struggle with like the action. The only reason I'm a little bit more positive about this film is because, well, two things. One, I don't think that the filmmakers are coming at this saying like, "Hey, we should have some consideration for Julianne Moore's character." Because I think the film itself is kind of purposely questioning and confusing. If the film was like, oh, this person actually doesn't deserve, they were in love and this person doesn't deserve to have this, like then I would be like, bullshit. I can't, she's a pedophile. I can't deal with it. That's way too like soft. But the second reason is I don't think she is the protagonist of this film, right? She doesn't change. We don't actually ever get a good sense of who she was, and therefore if she did change, and then even Natalie Portman's character, she might change a little bit, but she seems kind of like she is the person in the beginning, and she just gets a little bit closer to Julianne Moore, maybe in terms of like her personality. I think that's what we kind of see at the end when she's maybe filming the scene. But I do think there's something interesting to follow Joe's perspective.
mm,
Like if you think of him as the protagonist, so that's Charles Melton, that's where I think it's a little bit more interesting, right? Because he takes the sort of almost the whole film to get to the place of having a frank conversation with his wife to question, what if I wasn't? Because there's a lot in this film where you can tell that people tell themselves scripts, people tell themselves stories, and then they reify those stories, right? So like, um, there in that scene, I felt like there's a point where Julianne Moore over and over again, she says, you was she something like you were in the lead or you were leading things, and it felt to me something
You were
like
in control.
yeah, you were in control. And it felt to me more like that's something that exact phrase is something that has been repeated in the past. And it was sort of her telling herself that and telling him that in almost like a brainwashing way of like, don't forget, you were always in control. You were in control. You were in control. Because we all know that's the only way that this makes sense. And that's what we have to say, whether or not it's true. Meanwhile, this is the exact moment where he's trying to question, was it true? Right? He's trying to question, was I in control? Like, what if I was too young? If I was too young, by definition, I could not have been in control, which is the whole reason that like age limits exist on these things, right? Because we, as a society, have decided someone under a certain age cannot be determined to be in control of these decisions because they're literally too young. I mean, your prefrontal frontal cortex isn't even fully developed. Like, you can't make these decisions yet. And that's basically, you take a whole film where he's pretty low key, but he eventually gets to the point of like, what if I wasn't ready to make those decisions yet? Which is what we want him to question, right? And so to me, like that's a pretty significant change that's worthwhile, like just to get him to questioning that and to sort of break the brainwashing to a certain extent was interesting. And I actually thought his performance was, for me, like more interesting almost. Like I don't know how you have felt. I thought they were all fine, but like um I don't know, Susie, you saw it this morning, so maybe you can tell me, but like, was
Mm.
Julianne Moore lisping the whole movie, or was it only supposed to be once she gets like a little bit further in and like starts losing control a little bit?
I
Like,
didn't
I feel like
realize it until I realized Natalie Portman was putting on a lisp, and I was like, oh, okay, Julianne Moore's lisping, I guess.
I only noticed her like pretty far, like I'm saying like an hour into the movie, and it was at a
Okay.
moment where she was kind of stressed. So I thought like, oh, maybe she had a lisp when she was younger, and so she's like, this is supposed to be like it comes out when she's um but it felt like a very like to Soul's Plane, like it felt a little bit like I've seen this movie before. Like that's kind of like when you're writing, like the
Yeah.
first choice you would think of as like a shorthand for like them going somebody going back to like a younger state. And she even says like I am naive, right? There's so many of these moments where they just like blatant like
Mhm.
state what they want you to believe, but I think that's okay because it's kind of like we don't know if it's true or if it's the character trying to convince themselves.
I thought
Um,
that something really clicked in my brain when you started talking about Charles Melton's character as Joe, and him kind of just like really bringing it from the rear actually and becoming something very interesting. And I realized also that he's the one character that I feel like um there's some love for him. I don't know why, but even the movie itself seems very cold toward both um well, Elizabeth, the Natalie Portman character, and the Julianne Moore character. Um, not indifferent, like not even clinical. It's just sort of like we're trying to paint something very balanced. So here are all of these facets of these two, but you don't really get any kind of like, and to use your word, soul heart, out of any of these characters except for the Joe character. And he does like play it very well. I mean, I felt for him when he's trying to reach out to Natalie Portman, not realizing kind of not having had the experience maybe of a more casual affair or something like that. But I felt something there in a way that I don't kind of like aside from confusion for a lot of these motivations. So I don't really know exactly how I'm meant to feel except for Joe. And I'm very locked in as soon as he starts having questions. And because it's also like a release for the audience who's also kind of like, Joe, what were you thinking? You know, in a lot of ways, and getting at least closer to even asking that question. We
mm.
feel like, oh, thank God, Joe, yes, please. And I'm realizing too, there was at least one other conversation when I was leaning in more, but the action ended. And so I was like, damn it. Like, I think it was a Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore conversation, but it started getting interesting and then just kind of like backed away.
Well, also the Joe with his son on the roof, I thought was a great scene because it's
Yes. Oh
like,
my
and he
God.
literally at that point, like he's breaking down, and he literally says like, which I thought was so kind of relatable. He's like, I don't know if like we're bonding or if I'm just
Mm,
like creating a fucked up memory for
I
you. Like, and
know.
I was just like, that's
So real.
like so real, and like he has a family, like that's a fact that he has to deal with, right? Like
mm,
regardless, and that's the type of thing that does make you not question these things, right? Because if you start questioning this, then you're what are you questioning the existence of your three children? Are you questioning like are you deciding to make yourself a victim of abuse as opposed to someone who as a 13-year-old boy went after an older woman and managed to like marry her and now has a happy life? Like you're making the decision to investigate that and basically choose to view your life through a much crappier lens. And the question is just like, if that lens is the true lens, how hard is it to make that decision? Like it's a really tough thing that he has to do. You're dealing with 20 years of brainwashing, over 20 years of brainwashing, and self brainwashing, right? Telling yourself and convincing yourself that this everything is okay, and that everyone who thinks anything is weird about their relationship just doesn't know that they're in love. um and with Julianne Moore, we get the one letter, and she even says in the letter, like, no one can know about this, like burn this letter. So we do get acknowledgement that she did know, because again, we try to get the story, I think, from her ex-husband that like she acted like she didn't even know there was anything wrong with what they did because they're in love. But it's like the reality, we do get it, we do know that that's not true, because she put in the letters like, burn this because I could go, this is very illegal and I'll go to jail. Like she knew what she was doing was wrong. um I mean, what did you think of when her son talks about how her older brothers abused her, and then at the end, there's the moment where she somehow knows about that and she denies it? I felt like that was supposed to be a very powerful moment, both for the audience and for Natalie Portman's character. But I was a little bit like, I was still kind of confused. I was like, well, wait, who is telling the truth? Which I think was both more like purposeful and good, but also I didn't have the emotional reaction I was supposed to because I was just more confused than anything else.
yeah, and that's a good question. Um, it also makes me think about like when. Yes, it is. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is brainwashing. But like, when do you start to like take control? And I don't know, is this like the first time he's asking these questions? Maybe, I guess it is. Is that like believable? I don't know. How old is he? He's like in his 30s now in the film, like the Joe character.
Late 30s, yeah, is it 36 or 30, something like that? Because I know when she gets there, at some point, Natalie Portman says her age and says we're the same age. I
Oh,
feel like it
right,
might
right.
be 36 or
Mm,
something, but I don't, it's somewhere in the late 30s, which is also the age that Julianne Moore is when the whole thing starts, right?
yeah, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess those are interesting questions. Um,
I kind of felt the same as you, Dom, though, as far as like that, like at the graduation when Georgie supposedly reveals that thing. Well, and we'll just spoil it. It's, the abuse and everything. But and then I was kind of confused at what I was supposed to be feeling at Natalie Portman's reaction to it. Because she seemed to be like it was some kind of deep betrayal or something. Like she assumed a thing, and now it's like, my world has been rocked. Are you kidding me? This isn't true, or is something. And then I was like, well, why would you even assume that that Gracie is telling the truth over, you know what I mean? It's like I don't know where Natalie Portman her character's motivation was coming from. I don't know what that reaction was.
I
I
also
don't,
think, yeah, I also think like she proves to be pretty bad at her job, right? Like
yeah.
she's very surprised and shocked, like almost like, oh, I didn't know her. Is this true? Is this not true? I was basing my whole character on this at that point. And then there's a similar moment when she's in bed with Joe and she's like, he's, she'll be okay. Like people, kind of like people like her are always okay because
Mhm.
she's kind of is, as an actor, you're supposed to not judge your character, right? That's the last thing you can do.
Yeah.
But to me, it seems like she's judging her character pretty hard, right? She's saying like she'll be okay. She's like this hard person. Don't worry about her. So she's got this sense of like I know the type of person she is. But at the same time, we as an audience have seen Julianne Moore like break down crying for almost no reason multiple
Yeah.
times. And Joe does know her and says like you don't know her at all. Like she's not going to be okay. And he seems to be more right than her, even though I think going into the movie, we kind of feel like, oh, she's a pedophile. Like she's going to be okay. Like she knows what she's doing. She's in charge. So that's where like that nuance to me was interesting. And then they, have this very quick affair. And Natalie Portman's response is like, this is just what grown-ups do, which
That
is
was
like,
so
again, like,
rude.
is like just infantilizing him, which is what
Uh-huh.
you presume has been done to him his entire life. And he does act kind of naive there. Um, but then you get that weird thing now, I'm remembering too, where Julianne Moore says like, "Oh, he's been with more women than me anyway. Like he's been with 3 women, but so he was with 2 other women before he was 13. Like, is that true? Is that true, or is that just like if that fact is true, that actually helps your case a lot, right? That he was like already sexually experienced. It seems like a stretch for that to be true, but it could be true. Um, it's almost like it's kind of searching for the truth, but like playing with the fact that like that's what she's doing right now. Natalie Portman is searching for the truth of this character, but it's kind of like you'll never know the truth because these characters themselves don't know the truth. Which to
Mhm.
me, like if there was a theme that's interesting, that is interesting to me.
Mhm,
Honestly, though, like that theme is more interesting to me ultimately than this film is.
mhm.
But it's just because it's so complicated. So it's a really hard thing to ask a film to do to be this complicated and be satisfying. Like maybe it's not worried with being satisfying. Maybe it's more worried with just making you think, like ask these questions.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, good, really good points. Yeah, I guess that was the biggest question for me. Like, like say her the Julianne Moore character was abused. Um, yeah, that's I thought about The Shining a lot when I was watching this. Um, because I'm curious about what happened to Jack um in that movie and what made him the way he was. And um I'm kind of curious about what happened to the Julianne Moore character too. And like but when like what when you become an adult, like at what point do you take responsibility for the decisions and the actions you
yeah,
and
yeah.
also the Joe character as well. Like he's a grown ass man, like
No,
he's like a man
yeah. I
child.
mean,
Yeah, and it's weird. Like again, I felt like I did feel a sadness for him too. Like he's not able to reconcile with all of the stuff that's going on, I think, within him and what's happened to him and yeah.
yeah, and we do get these moments where Julianne Moore, like we get these hints, like she does this sort of passive aggressive thing with her own daughter about the sleeves of the dress as like a compliment, but to clearly get her to stop. And then when someone later asks her about her mother, like what she was like, she says she was beautiful. So we get this sense that like it's all this like surface level stuff, like this superficialness that's not real in terms of like what a person is really like. But also all of that felt a little bit flat to your point, Soul. Like it's like whether or not she was abused to me doesn't really matter because it's like you can choose to be a cycle breaker, right? Like you can like if you were abused, then you don't have it's like you have to abuse someone. And similarly, like if your mother was like that towards you, some people would go 180 degrees the other way and be like, you're beautiful and you're perfect the way you are, and you don't have to ever worry about like so she's still the person that she is, regardless of how she got to be. Her actions are still her own. And like I'm not that interested in her as a character, to be honest with you. So and I think the film does well to also not go that far down that road, because if it did, I think it would be, like you said, an investigation into like what makes a pedophile, which is just not interesting to me, because it's just like I don't care about you enough to,
Mm.
it doesn't change anything. Your actions, your actions. So,
But it is a choice that
it,
they are the choices you make, which is why it kind of reminded me of The Shining, because like they're all involved, like Danny, you know, Jack and Wendy, they're all involved in this sort of trauma, and like it's like how the different people like react to, you know,
yeah. So that's the
right? So
thing.
it's,
And
it's yeah, it kind of reminded me
if
of
you
that.
were to parallel to The Shining, it would be like, how do Jack's actions affect Danny and his wife? And it's similar, like how do Julianne Moore's actions affect her husband? And then you have this sort of separate thing, which is not really how Natalie Portman is affected by it, but more like the idea of, in a very short time, investigating what motivates and makes a person be who they are and what the truth is, which to me is just sort of like, again, it's just all theme. Her character is just, she doesn't, Natalie Portman doesn't change that much either. You get the sense that she's sort of engaged, but we'll get to when we get to it. I think they allude to the fact that she probably has a relationship with the director of the
Mhm.
film, right? She has this casual relationship with Joe, very, because she's just that none of that matters, and it's just like it all she cares about is this investigation into the truth, but then she's not very good at that either. Um,
Yeah, were we supposed to think that? Because I wasn't sure with the inclusion of that movie scene at the end. Like, were we supposed to think of that performance like she nailed it or what or anything? Because I was just like, that's just kind of whatever, Natalie Portman, or
Yeah,
rather
I think
actress.
what was interesting was not that it ended on a beautiful, perfect take that we all think is amazing. It ended on her
Mhm.
being like, I need to go more. I need to drill deeper. So like to me,
Okay.
the way I interpreted it was like she is on this quest for the truth and failing at it and will continue to be on this quest for the truth. Um,
Okay.
but also like, is that enough for a whole movie? Like, no, it's not. It's only for me, it's passable because it's almost like she's the inciting incident, right? Like the reason we're seeing this story now is because they're making this film about what happened now, and she's basically coming into their lives. That's why this part of their long story happens right now. So again, for me, if I were to say positive things about this film, it would be viewing it through the lens of like Joe as the protagonist, who like he starts finally what kicks off his investigation into his past that he's been ignoring is Natalie Portman's entrance into this whole thing. And
Mhm.
so her delving into the truth forces, makes him sort of start to delve into the truth. And he gets into a point where he's at least questioning it. It doesn't end with him like running away and changing his whole life, but it does have those tiny little seeds of like he's texting this other person who's into the same things as him with butterflies.
Mm.
And he does sleep with Natalie Portman in a way that in the beginning he's like physically like will stand far away from her. Like he's
Yeah.
very clear about like I don't want any part of this, like or part of you. He's very much like distanced literally from all of it. So to me, it's like somebody comes, starts investigating this, and it makes him look inside, but it does have that realism at the end of like, well, what's he gonna do? He's got 3 kids. He's about to be in an empty nest with this woman now.
Right.
Um, and Natalie Portman does give him that one crumb, which I think is really interesting, which is it's not just something like it's not too late, like that type of
Yeah.
thing. Like it's possible. You're not locked in to this life. Like it's possible to change your life. And that's kind of to me is like the most important thing she does. She gives his character a lifeline to even consider that. Like, but it's complicated, right? A different version of this movie is him leaving and going to on that trip with his buddy who does the butterflies, right? It's like that would in some ways be more simple and satisfying, but also be much less it'd be a totally different movie. This movie is about the gray areas and the realistic complications of life.
Mm.
He's dutiful. I think
Yeah.
he's a devoted father. And I actually think he loves Gracie. That's what complicates things. If he wasn't in love with her, it would be easier. And maybe those questions would have plagued him more.
Well,
But the fact is he grew up with her.
right. Does
He
he love
was
her? Is what he feels
Right.
love? Is it the same love he would feel with the person he's texting?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I think he doesn't know the answer to that, which is what I think is so interesting.
and
Mm.
he loves his children. That really like ties him there.
Yeah,
Even if I were to question his love of Gracie, I mean, because the movie shows me that, and I feel it.
for sure. Yeah. I think the children are kind of what are keeping him there, and the children, and I think there's even a line as much, right? There's a subtle line, something about like, what is, if I was too young, like, what does that mean? And there was some line in there that made me think, like, where he says, what about the kids? Like it's almost like a kid finding out they're an accident. Do you know what I mean? Like that could have, like this would be the ultimate. Well, they would have already grown up with worse than finding out you're an accident, right? You grow up knowing that you're the product of your father being 13 years old. Although the younger ones, they were older. He was older, right? But like and then the reverse, Julianne's more Georgie, her other son from other, he comes out and says it in the first time they meet, like, yeah, she ruined my life. Like it's just a fact. Like, yes, no, it's a fact. Like my mother, we had an all-American family. My mother cheated on my father with a 13-year-old boy in a stock room. Like, of course that ruined my life. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not even being dramatic to say that. Like, of course, yes,
A
that's
small
something that ruins
town.
lives. Yeah, like and even their actual son, the two of them son, he had his equivalent is when they're on that roof and he says like point blank factual, like of course I want to go to college. I can't wait to get out of here. And he's not saying he can't wait to get away from his father. I think they do have a good relationship. But like, yeah, of course you want to get out of the small town in Georgia where everyone knows this is your story and go to college where you don't have to tell people that. It's just like that's the fact. Like that's the way it would be.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like for me, not particularly interesting. Yeah, it's just not, I don't know.
I mean, I wouldn't watch it again right away, certainly, but I do think there was some subtlety to the writing. There was some, even the text message that we see with Joe and the woman, or we don't even know who it is at first. The fact that they planted that very like neutral text message early on so that it's not weird when we do see it, when it actually does mean something. And also, oh, there was one other moment that I thought was great writing where he's telling Natalie Portman about what he does with the butterflies.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm not the only one who does this. I have this friend. And it's like, it's almost like he has a crush on her. Like that's what people do when they're have a crush, right? They tend to just mention other people more because they're on their
Mm,
mind more. Like there's no need to mention that specific friend unless there's more to that because you could just say, oh, yeah, this is a hobby lots of people have, but instead he's like thinking about that specific person. I mean, assuming it's a woman, but he's talking about that specific person and saying, yeah, like, she does really cool thing. Like that to me was like such a nice, it just felt so real to me that like people, and if people have ever been in relationships where people are drifting apart, then it's like, okay, this my partner starts to mention this other person more. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Because they're hanging out more. And it's just like that was like so subtle and so nice. And there were, moments that you could track in the writing here, I think that were um that elevate it above what it could have been, which would
mm,
have been like a much like a much more simple story, and a much been like, okay, I don't care. Like this is a really messed up situation, and I feel bad for this guy, but like I don't have any hope for this guy, and I don't care about this story. Which, like, in
But
terms
that's
of like the
what
Julian,
Soul's saying. That's
well, it is,
exactly
but
where Soul's at.
it is, it
Yeah,
is,
I mean,
it is.
you
But
know,
that's where you're at with Julianne Moore. Not like you're saying
Oh,
you feel that way about
yeah.
Joe too, because I feel that way about Julianne Moore. I didn't love this movie, but I also think it does it a disservice to call. I don't think it's simple. I think if
mm,
you only read it at that level, then you're kind of like, you're throwing it in the pot with a bunch of lesser films. I do think there's some character work in this that is interesting. Um, of course, if you're in a certain mindset and you're just like Julianne Moore is a pedophile, period. Joe should have realized this when he was 13, period. Then like, and it's not your fault as an audience member. It just means that the film didn't put in it enough to make you feel like the heart of that, which I kind of get too, because it wasn't totally successful the whole time with me, but I did get to think that a little bit is where I would
I
kind
feel
of like,
like Soul will never be a fan of this movie. You know what I mean? Whereas like
yeah,
maybe Dom, you and I are a little bit. I might need more convincing. It sounds like you need more convincing. I agree too that like there's some interesting character work that's been done related to that. How do you guys feel about? I feel like the very deliberate choice to make Joe a little bit juvenile seeming, um, almost simplistic, like charmingly so at times. And then at times it was just kind of like he's just about to bro it out right now or so, you know, and it's there was like some very deliberate choices there. And what was it supposed to make us feel about his not predicament, his life, but his situation? Is it supposed to? And then like his father being very reluctant to really unpack anything, it seems like. Um, so I don't know how that all kind of, well, how did those puzzle pieces arrange themselves?
yeah. I mean, again, in terms of like what Soul was saying about like the shorthand and the oversimplification, like the fact that this character's mother dies as well when he's what,
Mm,
20 or something like that.
20.
So like that whole aspect of it, of like this, his wife acting as sort of a maternal figure,
Yeah.
I think was there for sure, but also again not particularly interesting, because it's like, first of all, we have movies about, couples where both people are 40 and they're still the underdeveloped man who, his wife has to be a mother, do certain things for him that she shouldn't have to do. So like I didn't get that much out of that. I also didn't get like the father like is so removed that it's almost like, why is he even there except to show that he doesn't act like there's a lot of people in this film who should have, and or at least justifiably could have had very, very strong reactions to this whole thing. But by the time we are in this film 20 years later, everyone has sort of made their peace with it, or at least are telling you they've made their peace with it. Right? Like the ex-husband is just sitting there very calmly and he's like, yeah, her and the boy seem to have a good relationship. It's like, what? Like, could a person really utter such a thing and believe it themselves and make someone believe it? Like,
Yeah.
the kids are the only ones who are like not hiding it, and they're overtly pissed, and they kind of should be overtly pissed. um so like I don't know, like he definitely does seem young, on the younger side, but also you would be as a character, right? If you started, they kept saying like he grew up early because he had to take care of sisters his sisters, which aren't even in the movie, right? And then um but then he acts pretty young because at a certain point, once she's out of prison, she's his wife, but you'd imagine probably doing everything for him, um, like a kind of like a mother would to a certain extent. So, and we don't know anything either about like, as much as I'm saying it's a great character study, like he's an X-ray tech, I guess,
Mhm.
and he does butterflies. That's it. Like, you don't. He's a loving father, I guess, but we don't get a sense of like who he is
is he a loving
internally.
father? Like, I don't know.
I
Like,
think he loves
so
his
I think he
kids.
loves his kids, but I think he doesn't know how to be a father. It's interesting to me, like
Mm.
on that roof scene, like I know he's high, but like the child is the grown up. Like, he's like, you know, he's
Yeah.
the one that's kind of he's a man child. Like he's never grown up,
Yeah, but
right?
again, like there are fathers who are portrayed as men. Like I just think that's who he is, and it's kind of independent of all of this too. Well, I don't know. I got the sense that like it was without question that his three kids love him and that he has a good
I think
relationship with
so.
them.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a good relationship. I think it's a different relationship. I don't think
Well, yeah, sure. If
yeah,
your
well, of
father
course,
was
yeah.
13 years older
Yeah,
than you, you'd have,
obviously, yeah.
you
And that's the
know,
yeah, and that's yeah. It's just I don't know, man. A strange film. Um,
it is strange. I mean, even that I wish there was more of like they actually foreshadow the graduation lunch, and it's like everyone's gonna be together. And in my mind, I was thinking like maybe it's the Italian dinner in me, but I was thinking of like a giant table with like these 20 people sitting around it, and you have like these interesting interactions where it's like, oh, this is my granddaughter who's the same age as my daughter who's sitting and they're sitting next to like literally they're graduating together, and one is her granddaughter, one's her daughter, and you have your current husband and your ex-husband. Like that alone has enough interesting family dynamics to make for like very meaty scenes, and instead like it's just again it's very realistic. It's kind of like, oh, there's going to be these other people in the restaurant that we don't really want to deal with, but we have to say hi to them. So again, that is like really hyper realistic to me. I feel like that's actually the way it would happen in real life, but also like shies away from the drama that is so rich of like I want to see what's the relationship of that kid who's in the same graduating class as her. I don't even know what would make that. Would she be her? What would she be? Stepsister?
something like that.
Like
I
what
don't
would their
care.
relationship be? Like half sister and aunt? Maybe no, no. I don't even know what their relationship would be.
mm,
If your granddaughter and daughter, I don't know. It's a weird relationship, is my point. So it's like worth like do those people just not talk to each other, which is kind of the way the film goes. And again, that's realistic, but it's also like I want to see that. I want to see those people interact because it's such, the whole point is this is such a weird, unusual situation, and it doesn't really use that to its full extent.
Yeah, I feel the same. I'm realizing. And it's kind of like that makes me wonder if Todd Haynes knows where the drama is, which is weird because his stuff is always inherently dramatic. And yet I feel like I feel like I did not get enough drama in some weird way.
I think it's very purposeful. I think it's he's interested in what he's interested in, and that's what he shows. And I think he gets away with, or the writer gets away with, like, again, I think it's realistic. I think having those people sort of pass and say the obligatory hello is probably exactly how it would happen. So it's
Mm.
not like you can't do it because it's fake, but it's just kind of like, all right, so this is not what you're focused on. And it is a lot of people. So it like that would be very quickly become a sprawling thing of like you're introduced to this whole other family. But um they do it, and then it's like she goes out of her way, and like they have the moment in the bathroom in the mirrors, and it's
Yeah.
just like I wanted this day to go good and I wanted my life to be perfect, and it's just like, okay, so that scene was only there so that they could have the scene in the bathroom. But for me, the scene in the bathroom between the two of them, honestly, like most of the scenes between the two of them, I felt like I was supposed to be getting more than I was. Like when she puts on her makeup, and when she there's a couple of these scenes, even when they're sitting side by side, when the daughter's trying on gowns for underneath the uh,
The
dress for
graduation.
graduation. Like there are these two-hander scenes that these the two powerhouse actors, and you expect there to be a lot there, but it seems like they're both been told to kind of like put a lid on it, let everything happen underneath, and let the audience kind of have to decipher what's happening. So it does seem like a purposeful choice. But for me, I was left with a lot of those scenes being like a little bit less satisfied because I was confused, and I think I was supposed to be
yeah, I think
confused.
that was a point. I think that's part of the
Yeah.
commentary.
Mm. Yeah, I don't like confusion. it was like grainy footage, and the music were like the intro thoughts that I had had.
Yeah, the
Aside
music
from
was
like
intense, huh? Again, that was very
yeah,
purposeful,
it was
obviously.
kind of I kind of like over the top music sometimes. It generally like resolves itself to a purpose for the most part. I don't know that I don't know, this one like it kind of stayed funny to me. Like
Mm,
anytime it happened, I was like,
mm,
yeah.
yeah, right.
Um mm,
I'm not familiar with his work, Todd Haynes's work. Maybe I should
okay.
watch more of his work. What would you guys recommend? What should I start with?
He really loves Julianne Moore. I'm like remembering a couple of his that he
I
had
see.
her
So his
in.
filmography here: Poisons, 1991, Safe, Velvet Goldmine, Far From
Oh my
Heaven, I'm
God,
Not
I forgot.
There,
Yeah,
Carol,
Safe.
Safe.
Yeah, that might be the one for you.
Okay, Wonderstruck, Dark
I think
Waters,
I'm Not There. I'm Not There was like this sort of big
the Bob
one.
Dylan one. Was that the Bob
Yeah, it
Dylan
was like
one?
all these
Okay.
different actors all playing
Huh. Yeah, he
Bob
does some
Dylan.
interesting stuff.
That was like, I think that was probably nominated too for like that was a. I remember when that happened. It was big, but I don't. Let me
mm,
check here. That was 2007. It feels more recent than that, but I remember that was a big deal when that
mm,
was out.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
um, is he kind of reminiscent of? Is this movie kind of reminiscent for of Todd Solondz's work? Are you familiar with his work?
um, Interesting. How do you link those two?
Um,
I consider Todd Solondz to be like very provocative, with like sexual themes and things
yeah,
like that.
yeah, not the maybe not so
You
much
mean
the provocative
provocative in
part,
other
but like
ways?
this, um, just like the the coldness of it. Um,
How he chooses like to portray everyday lives, um,
Even like the
in like
music, like
yeah.
that like the over the top music, like this
Okay.
very bright, happy music that's that is going
Yeah, I
along with
think
this like this incredibly again awful
Yeah,
things that are going on,
dark.
right? Yeah, so it's like this that obviousness is sort of the part of the actual commentary. Where in this film too, like the obvious, even to Dom's point, to them in the scenes together, like they seemed very straightforward. Like they, I don't know. And I
it
guess
felt
that's part
very
of the
like
that's part of the this
it
messaging.
felt very like independent and almost kind of like East Coast to me. Um, I say both as positives. Just especially considering like the the star power in terms of cast. Like it felt to me like a smaller movie and similar to like a Todd Solondz. Like it felt there's something about it felt less like I feel like if this also on top of everything we've already said, if it also felt Hollywood, I would have been like, oh God, I hate this movie. Um, and I didn't hate it. I didn't, I didn't love it. It seems like I liked it more than you, but there did seem to be something genuinely, um, I don't know. It seemed to me that the film was asking questions, and again, like for me, that's a useful thing for films that I watch to do.
Mhm.
I don't know if East Coast means anything to anyone else.
Yeah, I
Honestly,
don't
it's
know.
just something that
That's fine. I don't
I I don't know. Sometimes I watch things and I feel like I don't know.
know. Yeah. Um, Final thoughts, I guess. Susie, would you ultimately recommend? Is this something that people should watch?
No, this was a difficult one for me to recommend. I like it so, in some ways as like a character, a study in character and things like that. But I yeah, I didn't particularly enjoy it, and I have to like enjoy some aspect of a movie to at least like recommend it on. But um to that, I still nevertheless think it was probably a successful movie if you can reconcile those two things.
Mm,
Yeah,
Mm,
I think it did what it wants to do. I think Todd Haynes like didn't fail. I think he did what he wants to do.
Yeah.
I think I am not very interested in watching this type of film generally. So I would have to know the person I was recommending it to is like does want to watch that type of movie. I almost want to read the script. Like I feel like the stuff that I picked out that I
Mm.
really thought were really well done were in this at the script level, like subtle ways to add things that are consistent with character throughout so that nothing is sort of a surprise when something does actually happen. Like I thought it did that really successfully. I just think the story that they're telling overall is one that is not that interesting to me. Maybe because like you, maybe it's hard for me to get past the sort of like initial like, okay, well, this is a story about a pedophile. And like I would be just as happy if she were just in prison for the rest of her life. Um, but again, it's not. I do think that if you watch it, maybe go into it watching it knowing that this is Joe's story, and maybe you'll have a totally different experience if you know that the first time, because everything about this film doesn't tell you that, right? It's May, December, it's Natalie Portman, Julianne Moore, right? Like, and so you're watching it for them. And again, like I think obviously, I personally think both of them are great actors. I didn't think that in the scenes that they elevated things to a way where I felt something powerful. And again, I think that's because they were directed that way and because they wanted it to be more realistic and they wanted things to be ambiguous. And so it's kind of hard to feel something one way really strongly because at the point it's for it to be ambiguous and have this study. Um, so yeah, I would say like the writing, I think, especially the character writing, because like you said, so like some of the plot things we're sort of like, yeah, that's I've seen that before. It's obvious. But like there's some good craft here for the characters and for writing. And so if you wanted to study that.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that discussion. If you found it interesting, informative, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It'll really help us out. We have some really cool discussions lined up for you, so I hope you're looking forward to them, and I'll see you next time.